join me in welcoming Dr. Keri Watson.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Greg. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight. A full house, that's great to see. And thanks to the New Smyrna Museum of History, Florida Humanities, and the Southeast Volusia Historical Society. So tonight I'm going to talk about the Barefoot Mailman and Florida's post office murals. So between 1938 and 1946, from Milton to Miami, okay, so you haven't been to Milton, it's up here by Pensacola. Artists were hired, and you all know where Miami is, right? It's down here. Artists were hired by the section to paint murals and carve relief sculptures to decorate Florida's newly built post offices. And so the post offices were built by the WPA, but the Treasury section is who paid to decorate them. Today, these examples of public art offer glimpses of Florida's past and illustrate the importance of federal art patronage during the Great Depression. Post office murals made art a part of everyday life, and in many parts of the country, including Florida, they gave people their first encounter with original works of art. So to quote Fraser again, quote, "Art in every small town, right there in your face, filling up a whole wall every time you bought a stamp, could elevate the country." So 16 post offices were built in Florida during the Great Depression, and I'm just showing you the photos of the facades of some of them here, kind of somewhat as much as I could get them adjacent to where they live. But you see in many cases that the footprint was the same, and the town would pick the facade that kind of matched their image, right? So maybe Art Deco in South Florida and Colonial Revival in the Panhandle. And we see that throughout the country, in fact. And we'll also see that there are post offices that look just like this in other parts of the country for the same reasons. Okay, so not the prettiest slide, but it gives you a lot of information. So 14 artists created 13 murals and 3 sculptural reliefs to decorate Florida's new post offices during the Depression. So post office murals often focus on local history, and Florida's murals are no exception. So we're going to be looking more closely at this cycle of 6 murals that feature James Edward Hamilton, Florida's barefoot mail carrier. So mail service in Florida did not come as far south as Jupiter until 1867, when Star Route number 6451 was established. This route ran from New Smyrna to Key West, with stops at Sand Point, now Titusville, St. Lucie, and Jupiter. A beach walker was later added to carry the mail on foot from Jupiter to Miami, with boats kept at Lake Worth, Hillsborough, and New River, now Fort Lauderdale, for use in crossing the inlets. This route was nicknamed the Barefoot Mail Route and was used from December 18, 1884 until January 22, 1893. Prior to the introduction of this route, 56 miles of which were ferried over water and the other 80 miles of which were traversed on foot over the beach, mail had to take a 3,000-mile steamship journey from Jupiter, so down here, all the way up to New York City, and back down through Cuba before arriving up to 6 weeks later in Miami. So working the barefoot mail route was a strenuous and dangerous job, and barefoot mail carriers risked their lives to help people get their mail in a timely fashion, all for an annual salary of $600, the equivalent of about $13,000 today. So the most famous of these mailmen was James Edward Hamilton, shown right here, who was killed at Hillsborough Inlet in October of 1887. He had been delivering mail along the route since the early summer and was described as only 33 at the time, strong and active, 6 feet tall in his stocking feet, and weighing 180 pounds. He was an excellent swimmer and well able to take care of himself on land or in the water. It's believed that he tried to swim the river after discovering that someone had used his boat and left it on the other bank. His body was never found, but his mail satchel and clothes were discovered on the beach. Some speculate that he was killed by alligators, sharks, or barracuda, as there had been a lot of rain that month that resulted in high water levels and flooding of the lowlands, but others believe it was murder. The Barefoot route was discontinued when a rock road was put in between Jupiter and Miami. So in conducting research for the murals and deciding on an appropriate subject, DeHanas, you see here Stephen DeHanas, the artist, visited Palm Beach and met with Charles Pierce, who was the postmaster for Boynton Beach. Pierce had served as a carrier on the Barefoot route and was able to provide DeHanas with a lot of local lore. Stories of the Barefoot Mailman were popular with locals and provided a tangible way for them to connect to their past. In 1937, the Lake Worth Pioneer Association even installed a bronze plaque commemorating Hamilton's life at the Jupiter Lighthouse. By April 5th, 1939, DeHanas had decided on the theme, writing to section director Edward Bruce about a, quote, romantic individual that walked the most part of 80 miles through uncharted trails along the coastline, close quote, to deliver the mail. Bruce was enthusiastic about the idea and encouraged DeHanas to pursue the theme. Okay. Born in 1907 in Lorain, Ohio, DeHanas was the son of Hungarian immigrants, the third of 9 children. He left school at age 16 to work at a still mill office where he spent his free time copying pictures from calendars. He sold his drawings to coworkers for 50 cents apiece, then $1, and eventually $1.50 for a copy of a Norman Rockwell Post cover. Inspired by his local successes, he signed up for a correspondence course and then night classes at the Cleveland Art School. He apprenticed at a commercial art studio, and in 1932, his work won first prize at the Cleveland Art School. During and after school, DeHanas worked in a Cleveland advertising firm, then moved to New York City, where he picked up advertising work from clients including Four Roses Whiskey, Maxwell House Coffee, Pan Am Airlines, Olin Industries, and John Hancock Insurance. His work was featured in Esquire, Medical Times, McCall's, and Collier's prior to his first successful submission to the Saturday Evening Post. DeHanas' first post cover appeared on March 7, 1942. It was a well-received wartime image of air raid searchlights from an artillery battery. Over the course of the next 15 years, DeHanas became one of the Post's regular artists, producing over 100 covers over the course of his career, second only to Norman Rockwell. He eventually moved to the artist colony of Westport, Connecticut, where he found inspiration in the everyday lives of his neighbors and would go on to design numerous postage stamps for the United States Postal Service, create war posters during the Second World War, and serve on the faculty at the Famous Artists School. There's some wonderful videos on YouTube of the Famous Artists School where you can watch artists drawing, including DeHanas. Most accurately categorized as an American realist, DeHanas described himself as a spiritual child of the Ashcan School and noted that his greatest influences were Charles Birchfield, Grant Wood, and Edward Hopper. But before becoming a famous illustrator, DeHanas worked for the section. In 1936, he took a leave of absence from his job at a New York advertising agency and worked for 6 months in the Virgin Islands as a member of the U.S. Treasury Department Art Project. These 2 murals that he created are the only 2 examples of New Deal federal building artwork in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So I encourage you to look for them next time you have a cruise excursion, or you just go to the Virgin Islands. DeHanas, after working in the Virgin Islands, was commissioned to paint a mural for the Huntington Post Office in West Virginia, as well as for the post office in Logan, West Virginia. DeHanas was then offered the commission for the West Palm Beach Post Office in 1939. So sometimes if you'd already done some work, they would just reach out to you and ask you to do some more post offices. That's why someone like George Hill, Snow Hill has 3 in the state. Most artists did more than 1 if they did a good job. If they didn't, they got to do one and done. So he was offered the commission and was hired for the job. He paid his own way to go down to West Palm Beach so that he could talk to residents. He met Charles Pierce, talked to people who remembered the Barefoot Mailman, and then he went back to Connecticut to paint the canvases per the requirements of the section. And he sent his studies to DC for approval. Now, because of that, we have some of the studies. They're in the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So you can see these 3 murals that will become those murals that are hung in the post office. DeHanis's murals were installed at the West Palm Beach Post Office at 400 South Olive Avenue in 1940. In August 1972, the cycle was moved to a new post office at 801 Clematis Street, and in 1983, they were sent to Sarasota for repair and conservation. In 1985, they were moved again to the newly opened main office and distribution center at 3200 Summit Boulevard in suburban West Palm Beach, this one, and that is where I visited the murals after looking for them on Clematis. They weren't there. All right. I should say too that my husband's grandmother worked at this post office for many years, and my his husband's aunt's father, who is from West Palm Beach, remembers seeing them at the Clematis branch when he was growing up. Okay, so here's what they look like. So you can see you go in this kind of triangle-looking shape here, and they're by the post office boxes, and you can just see, you're not seeing the first one and the last one because I can't get far enough back to do that, so just imagine. So we'll go to the first panel. The first panel depicts Hamilton embarking on his route from the Jupiter Lighthouse. The lighthouse sits at the junction of the Indian River and the Jupiter Inlet. And in the background of the painting, we see the lighthouse keeper and his wife standing to the left of the door of the 105-foot-tall lighthouse behind a pile of split logs. The lighthouse was built in 1860 while the area was still largely undeveloped, and the keeper is shown appropriately holding an axe, taking a brief rest from chopping wood. His wife stands at his side, clutching the hem of her apron up to her waist. The inclusion of the axe alludes to the self-reliance of Florida's pioneers, but also hints to the dangers of life on the frontier. And in the upper right-hand corner of the painting, we see 2 pelicans flying through the early morning gray sky above a cypress tree. The position of the birds, the cypress tree, and the couple directs the viewer's attention to Hamilton, who occupies the center-left foreground of the painting. 3 palm trees and long grasses sway in the strong sea breeze behind him and to the left of the composition. Although contemporarily made photographs reveal that this is an accurate rendering of the scenery, DeHanis has created a stylized version of the trees, similar to the ways in which Wood created caricatured trees in his views of the Midwest. So we could say that DeHanis's work is realist, yet stylized, and the elements of the painting, including the overcast sky and the determined look on Hamilton's face, work together to foreshadow the tragedy of Hamilton's disappearance on October 10, 1887. In the second painting, Hamilton accepts mail from the postmaster before starting his 6-day round-trip journey to Miami and back up to Jupiter. Postmasters in rural Florida worked from their homes, and here the canceling of the registered mail is completed on a table set up on the porch. The postmaster's washtub hangs on a louvered wooden shutter to the left, and the atmosphere is rather tropical and lush with large aloe, palms, and plants surrounding the men. The third panel shows Hamilton carrying his mail accompanied by 2 fellow travelers. Mailman would sometimes escort people down to Miami for a $5 fee. As Pierce recalls, "Just as I was about ready to start on a trip to Miami, a man I knew only as Boswick came along and asked if he might go down the beach with me. I said that he could go if he would pay the usual fare of $5. He couldn't believe I would charge him $5 just for the privilege of walking down the beach. I answered that he had a right to walk on the beach when and where he chose at no cost at all, but that I was charging for the time he would cause me to lose waiting for him to rest when he got tired, and for ferrying him across the Hillsborough Inlet, the 4 miles down the river, and the 12 miles down Biscayne Bay in the boats that we had at those places. When we landed at Miami, Bostwick started off without saying a word about pay. When I stopped him, he promised to meet me in the morning before I left. I waited for more than an hour, but he didn't show up. In fact, I didn't see him again for 3 years, and by then he was broke and he couldn't pay me. Well, it is hard to believe that these two men would have fared well alone carrying their large luggage, but their inclusion shows one of the many ways that postal workers, and by extension the federal government, helped the local community. And of course these murals, that was the point, right, to show the beneficence of the federal government and the New Deal programs. DeHanas has depicted Hamilton in his characteristic bare feet, with his pants rolled up above his knees, whereas his guests are in full dress suits, hats, and shoes. The middle-aged man in the center wears a dark suit and bowler hat, while the older man wears a light-colored suit and straw hat. By varying their age and costume, DeHanas alludes to the variety of people who were living in or visiting Florida at the time. And beyond the shallow beach, DeHanas has included grass and false agave, a plant not brought to Florida until after the time when this is set, right, in the 1870s, 1880s. False agave won't be here until the time when DeHanas is visiting and painting his mural. The greenery marks the horizontal center line of the composition, with the periwinkle sky and wispy clouds filling the top half. And a large piece of driftwood fills half the foreground, but as in all of the panels, the figures are larger than life and pushed to the front of the picture plane, all except one. We'll see. The fourth painting depicts Hamilton striding through the sand with a prow and figurehead of a shipwreck behind him. Two herons rest on the wreckage. There were numerous shipwrecks in the later 19th century, and some pioneers claimed that they were able to build whole houses out of the wood from shipwrecks that washed on shore. So this is another way that DeHanas is including these kind of stories of old Florida. Now the fifth painting shows Hamilton rowing his skiff across a lush inlet adorned with large trees and Spanish moss. This is the only painting where Hamilton is not pushed to the foreground. In this case, you see that he is in the background, rowing in his canoe, as three huge alligators sunbathe in front of a large piece of driftwood. Now, at the time that DeHanas made these paintings, the prevailing opinion was that alligators had attacked and killed Hamilton as he swam across the inlet. So this panel can very much be shown as foreshadowing Hamilton's tragic death. The final painting in the cycle depicts Hamilton pausing for a drink of coconut milk, while two pelicans rest at his feet next to blooming yucca. To the left, more palms bend under the weight of their fruit. Pelicans are a symbol of the resurrection in painting, and yucca plants represent protection and transmutation. You recall that the two pelicans were also shown in the first painting, flying above and behind Hamilton. So with its pink-hued sky and setting sun, this painting creates an appropriate end to Hamilton's journey and commemoration of his life and service. The legend of a James Edward Hamilton mail carrier was immediately popular. It served to reinforce the significance of a local hero. And in 1943, Theodore Pratt penned The Barefoot Mailman, a novel based on the story of Hamilton, and adapted the art from the fourth panel to use as the cover of the book. A film adaptation of the novel was released in 1951, and today there are historical markers in Miami and Boca Raton. There are monumental bronze statues at Hamilton, at Hillsborough Inlet, and Hybiluxo. There is a historical walking tour that you can take.
Cool.
And the Boy Scouts of America do an annual reenactment, now in its probably 71st year. I have 69th year here, but I didn't just write this, so I'm going to add a couple of years. Not to mention motels and hotels named after him, including this one in Maryland, for I don't know what reason, with the artwork, again, DeHannes' artwork on their motel sign. This one is gone, lost to a hurricane with our sculpture, but this, you can still go to Lantana and stay here if you so desire. Or drive by and take a picture. 16 new post offices were built in Florida between 1938 and 1947, and each was decorated with murals or relief sculptures paid for by the Treasury Department's section of painting and sculpture. Florida's post office art offers an interesting peek into the state's history and how it was constructed and contested by artists, postmasters, and citizens during the 1930s and 40s. These murals, and others like them, reinforce a heroic image of perseverance that connected patrons to their local history and offered uplifting messages during the Great Depression. During this short-lived period of unprecedented federal and local government support for public art, New Deal programs sought to make art a part of the everyday life of people, and in many parts of the country, including Florida, gave people encounters with original works of art. Although the Civil Works Administration and Works Progress Administration built the post offices, it was the section that decorated them. And whereas the section commissioned artwork for courthouses and other federal buildings as well, it is the post office murals for which they are best remembered. Post offices were the perfect place to reach people, and under the leadership of Director Edward Bruce and Assistant Director Edward Rowan, the section provided work and recognition to artists, all while bringing art to everyone free of charge. Although the work was derided by some, with an article from the New York Times noting the term post office mural became for many critics a term of abuse, today, some 83 years later, most murals are admired by locals and tourists alike and studied as important documents of U.S. art history. So if you're interested in learning more about Florida's post office murals, I recently published a book, Florida's New Deal Parks and Post Office Murals, which presents readers with more information on the murals, but also information and photographs on Florida's first 10 state parks, Royal Palm State Park in Paradise Key, Florida Caverns State Park in Mariana, Torreo State Park in Rock Bluff, Olino State Park in High Springs, Mike Rose Goldhead Branch State Park in Keystone Heights, Fort Clinch State Park in Fernandina Beach, Highland Hammocks State Park in Sebring, Hillsborough River State Park in Tosassa, Miaka River State Park in Sarasota, and Ravine Garden State Park in Palatka. These first 10 parks that were New Deal parks became the basis for the Florida Park Service, which today has hundreds of parks and is an award-winning park service. Focusing on the state parks and post offices built in Florida between 1931 and 1946 under the auspices of the Civilian Conservation Corps, Public Works Administration, Civil Works Administration, Works Progress Administration, and Treasury section of Painting and Sculpture, and looking at Florida's Depression-era parks and post offices in concert, elucidates the ways in which the natural and built environments work together to constitute the cultural landscape, and provides insight into the role of the federal government in Florida's construction as an exotic and tropical paradise. So the book is divided into 3 parts that correspond to the main geographical regions of the state, north, central, and south. And it's really a travelogue, tourist guide, and a primary source for those interested in art, the environment, and the New Deal. There's even maps and a suggested route. I hope that this talk and possibly the book will prompt you to consider the interdependence of art and nature, and dare I say, the importance of federal and state patronage for the arts. Thank you.